now that my highlights and shadows are a little bit more under control around my eyes and on my forehead, we can kind of talk about, we're going to talk about like shading the cheeks and like the perimeter of the face. So I finally did have to go in and just use white. I'll still probably need to brighten up part of the forehead a little bit. Personally, me and cream makeup, my skin just does not love this, so I think a lot of mine is gonna really come together when I'm using powders, but it's one of those things you have to remember, and it's something that I struggle with even like doing theatrical makeup. When you stare at it up close for too long, you hate it. I look at it and I'm like, I am horrible at makeup, obviously, but you really have to think about like how far away someone is going to be seeing this. So always keep that in mind. Take a break, walk away from it, because it can get really frustrating. And yeah, so sometimes you just have to look at it from a different angle. You can see like me kind of like moving back looks a little bit better than if I get like really close. It's a little rough, but it's not too bad. But yeah, I really think it comes together when you start using more powders. I love powder, probably because I am so oily. But yeah, don't get discouraged, as I currently feel as you're doing this makeup. So you can kind of see, and so this is going to depend on a lot of like how your hair is styled, but I always like to have some kind of shading. Specifically for age, usually you kind of shade in here to kind of cave it in a little bit more, or you kind of round it out if you want to round somebody out, but I just like to have, a lot of people have really bright foreheads, but I still love to have just a little bit of shading. So I'm just going to take my sponge, and I'm going to mix up a little bit. So I started using the Misty Violet now, along with kind of everything else that I have going on, and I'm just going to take a little of this and kind of put it into the hairline. So you may not love having this much makeup in your hairline, but it will certainly help kind of round things out. You just don't want to have like this super like youthful glow, I feel like, around your face, and then have like all these wrinkles right after it. That's why I like to really shade. I do this with any makeup application pretty much, as I always like to have some kind of shading just to kind of frame out the face, because otherwise I think we lose a lot of definition. So it's kind of nice if you sort of like map everything else out first and then come back and do this, but you can kind of see, I think, like even just like a little bit, it just makes it, I don't know, to me I just feel like it makes it look more complete than when I have like these giant gaps up here. And so again, so this could be different for somebody who's not as pale as I am, but for me I think it's really important so that I don't lose definition, and that my face doesn't get super lost, that I kind of go in here and shade. So this is like a combination of like the deep purple, like Misty Violet, and a little bit of like my skin tone shades. So it looks a little bit too dark in some spots, but I'm going to go in with highlight and highlight around it. And then I think ultimately it'll be fine and kind of blend everything in. This is more just to sort of like frame out and sort of just like cover up the fact that I have a giant forehead. So that's also too why I might have to do something like this. But someone else may not have to, just because I have a large forehead, and we're trying to make up for that. So in this area, I'm going to apply it a little bit more heavily, just because I really want to like shade and cave this in. And so you can kind of see just from like this side to this side is kind of starting to like get a lot more shaded and kind of sad and spooky, I guess, too, and old. And then so for this one, we're gonna go ahead and kind of cave my cheeks in, but I'll give myself like sag right here too. We'll just like predict the future. So for this, so I have high cheekbones, so I usually can find mine pretty easily. If you don't know kind of where to start, if you go with like the top of your ear, so generally if you're like the top of your ear to here, that's going to be a good indicator for most people of kind of like where these cheekbones are. So since it's a larger area, I'm just going to keep using my sponge. I feel like I'm a little all over the place when it comes to applying things, but I don't know, my thing is always like you can apply it however, as long as you go back and kind of blend it out. So just kind of like we would if we were contouring. I have high cheekbones, so it's not going to be too hard for me to figure out how to make them look sunken. If your cheekbones are lower, you can always like cheat this up higher. And so again, a lot of people, I see them do this with old age, they draw this like horrible line in. If you want to give yourself a really squared off jaw, that's fine. Just please blend it and don't just leave it a line. So if you're going to do this, kind of commit and do this whole thing. Don't just like put a giant line on your face and say that your age makeup is done. Because you can always blend it out, and I think this is especially where blending out your lines is really important. So this looks pretty intense and dark right here, but the more I'm going to blend it into my skin, and when I add in my highlights, the more that's just going to kind of like fade out into everything else. So it's that purple that's kind of giving it like that nice shadow, and so that's why Misty Violet I think is so popular. But again, if you have a really, really warm skin tone, you might need to use like a warmer purple or like a warmer shading color. So those like stock colors are great and they work well for a lot of people, but what works well for one person is not going to work well for everyone. But you can kind of see just doing this like shading, it really, I feel like, does kind of like bring everything together, and kind of like makes everything a little bit better, a little bit more believable, because this side is still like super bright, whereas like this one, it's sort of like blending in with my background and like with everything else, and I feel like this is helping you make like a more complete look and character. So basically what I did here, this is almost just like what I do for my contour, but if I keep like deepening it a little bit, and so to deepen it, the whole thing doesn't have to be deep. I just really think like really right, like probably in the center of it and pulling it back towards your hairline, that's where we kind of want it to be the deepest, and that's what's really going to help give you that really like hollowed out definition. And again, we still have to go in and add in highlight, and this is far darker than I would ever contour my face, but once we go in with the extreme highlight, it's going to be a little bit less extreme. And then even though we're going to go in and we're going to do something a little different and like draw jowls in here, I'm still going to pull this shading just right kind of into here for right now, just because you don't want to be a floating head, and I like when everything connects, like even with beauty makeup and corrective makeup. I just think it's weird when people just have shading right here. To me, it just looks like more complete and framed out when we have everything. So I sort of do like the 3. I think that totally applies in age makeup as well. So we're gonna go in, as I get way too bright every time I turn away, and I'm gonna take just a little bit. If your ears are going to be showing, you may want to like put a little foundation on your ears or something, but for a look like this, I wouldn't be as concerned. But if you're ever like painting yourself purple or something like that, make sure you don't forget your ears. But if your face does look drastically different from your ears, or your ears get really red or something, you may want to put a little bit of makeup on them. And so for right now, we're just going to really lightly kind of like stipple this on, and what I mean by that is like you're just kind of like pressing it in, you're not like wiping it. If I wipe it, that's going to spread it, but it's also going to kind of thin it out. But when I just kind of press it into the skin like this, that's going to give me that intensity without taking it away, but it also kind of works to blend it at the same time. So your beauty blender could work like that, whatever it is. I don't really like beauty blenders because I don't like cleaning them, so that's why you'll see me using like brushes and disposable sponges. Again, so if I want to make that like a little bit more intense and darker and kind of fade it up. Great. So now that I have this, definitely it was like a whole different world, I think, on this side of my face. So now I need to work some of my highlights in. So I'm gonna use my regular skin highlight, and then we're gonna see if I need to come in with white here too. So for this area, you want to go right kind of on the top of your cheekbones. So this is just my skin tone highlight at first. I'm sure I'm probably gonna have to come in with white, but for now we'll pretend that this is bright enough and that it will work. And again, I want to come right under that shadow and kind of add this in. So it's really similar, I feel like, this process to like people that do start with just like a large amount of highlight, because a lot of people will just like start with the highlight and put the shadows on top of it. For me, I guess I don't know, it just makes more sense for me in my own head to do it this way, but you really do end up with the same kind of result. And then again, we can come in here, and so this is the part where it gets a little hard and it can look a little bit too like beauty makeup-y, but once you add in the rest of your wrinkles and everything, it'll all kind of even out. And then we'll take a little bit of the white, I think, and just put that right at the spots that you really want to be the most prominent. Again, I have a really large forehead, so we don't really need to call a ton of attention to that. But if you didn't and you had more room for highlight, then by all means you could highlight that like just as intensely as you did everything else. And so I'm gonna go in, and because it's me, just use the other end of my sponge, because again, trained in theater, none of us have any money or supplies ever, so we always have to kind of make the best of it. And so what I also like about using the sponge is that like if I have my contour on the other side, I can kind of just like go back and forth between the two as needed. And to blend it, you're basically just like right at that spot where they meet and they're the most intense, and you just kind of like move it back and forth. So sometimes I think of blending as just like little circles, but I think you can also just kind of like pat it into place, but you could be patting it into place like little circles as well. So if you're not sure how to blend, that's kind of a good way, an easier way to think about it. I think sometimes we just have to like break it down into simpler things and like concepts, and that helps it really make a little bit more sense. And so I'm just going to come in with my shading again. And again, I like to go back over everything with powders. I really think that helps things look just like more realistic because it kind of tones everything. But I think definitely adding in the cheeks and just kind of like the face framing shadow, that really helps a lot. So I'm going to go in, just kind of finish touching that up, and then we will kind of talk about like the nose and the mouth area before we move on to the jowls and the neck.